This episode is brought to you by Summer School Electronics. With pedals like the Snow Day Delay, the Pep Rally Fuzz, the Trash Panda, and my personal favorite, the Science Fair, which is two classic dirt pedals in one, with a mid-boosted overdrive on one side, a black lab rat circuit on the other, and a blend knob to blend between them to find the perfect classic stacked dirt sound you're looking for, it's hard not to find something you'll love. Mark builds all of his pedals by hand in Syracuse, New York, where he also works as a full-time educator. In addition to the super fun graphics on their pedals, Mark also offers custom artwork. Want your dog's face on a pedal? He can do it. Want your face on a pedal? He can make that happen too. Go over to summerschoolelectronics.com and make sure to tell him that 40 Watt Podcast sent you. Hey y'all, welcome to the 40 Watt Podcast. My name is Phillip, coming at you for the first time in the podcast in episode 5. Going to have a guest. I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit here, fellow Mississippian and no newcomer to podcasting, as he has his own podcast that I think he's been kind of getting back into the game. I'm going to let him talk about that for a little bit. But it's a new opportunity for us to talk and riff on a couple of topics and really explore a couple of things around gear that have been on my brain that I've been really wanting to talk to some folks about and start to explore and see how we actually feel about them. So today I've got Clifton Worley. He is from the Clifton Worley Podcast, very creatively named, as Dave Matthews says about his own band. So Clifton, tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on the show, and happy birthday, by the way.
I appreciate it.
You had a birthday. So I'm Cliff, and I'm from South Mississippi. I've been playing music ever since I was a young teenager. Kind of came up playing in church. Played in several bands as a teenager. Took a little hiatus for a while. And then, I guess about 10 years ago, I started getting back into playing. I went to work at a church as worship leader, and so that kind of was the catalyst for me getting back into playing more. And I guess about 4 years ago, almost, I started the Clifton Worley Show podcast, and really, it was an attempt to tell my story, because I started realizing, like, I had a collection of things, that had happened in my musical journey that I just kind of wanted to get out of my system and kind of express it. And it kind of turned into an interesting thing where, I started doing this interview format, and that kind of seemed to work for me. And, I started getting to know different guitar builders and, musicians, and so it's really cool. It brought me together with a community of people that I never knew existed, outside of my network. And here I am 4 years later, and it's been a blast. I've kind of been on hiatus, through the pandemic and stuff. I did a couple episodes, and hoping to get back into it soon.
Oh, see, that's awesome. So that's very much why I've gotten into it. I feel like podcast is still real new for me. I think I have less than 3 hours total content already, but similar thing. I've got a story I want to talk about. One, I love guitar, I love music, I love gear, and so I love talking about it. I don't have a lot of people in my immediate life that I get to have those conversations with. So I'm like, well, I'm just going to talk out into the void and see if anybody talks back, That's what the podcasting has felt like. I mean, I'm literally, for my last 4 episodes, I'm sitting by myself, just kind of riffing on whatever's on my brain in the gear world. And a few people are listening. A few people are getting me some comments back, which is great. Which is, I didn't really expect anybody to listen. I went in saying if I got like a person to listen to it, I would keep doing it. So Doing okay. Getting at this point, not a lot of podcasters talk about their numbers. I'm getting a couple of dozen listeners a week per episode, something like that. So it's kind of cool. But I've listened to your show, and of course, I got into other podcasters. I think everybody talks about Blake over at the Tone Mob starting this sort of format. Actually, I've chatted with him on Facebook a couple of times as I was getting ready to start this and getting some advice and ideas from it. But I got a story. I've been a musician for a while, and I wanted to talk about these things that I go through. And I think I talked to you about this when I was asking you if you wanted to come on, is that I think especially Southern musicians and Mississippi musicians need a place to talk. We're kind of, I don't know, it feels like everybody is an East or West Coast guy in this market.
Totally.
And it's like especially the West Coast. There's a lot of West Coasters doing this, and that's great, but we have a different story. I know you've heard it plenty, and I hear it plenty. There's all the jokes about people are tired of demos with blues licks, and they're tired of blues, and it's like that's what I live and grew up in and cut my teeth on. I didn't do it because it was popular that's Mississippi. That's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the church music scene, that's a whole other animal that I've only recently discovered.
Mm-hmm.
So, and of course, you've been in that for a while.
Yeah, Mississippi is kind of an interesting corner because but we can relate to this. We know it, and we know all the everything that comes along with being from the South. And I think honestly, when I started podcasting, and being in the gear community, it's a huge West Coast presence. I mean, there's a reason why the main NAM is there, right? Because that's where all the business is. And so it's kind of like I was I'd open my mouth, start talking, and it kind of, people had a lot of questions, just from the Southern accent. And I think they were intrigued a little bit by, what's this guy about? What's his viewpoint? Where's he coming from on this? And met a lot of great friends. It's kind of an icebreaker, really, having that different point of view. But yeah, man, talking about the blues, as a guitar player, it's hard to come up in Mississippi in the era, I guess we did, I don't know about, if I was a teenager now, what I'd be coming up in. But back in the 90s, there was just a fascination with the blues and, roots rock and the proximity we were to, several of those bands that came out of the South were a huge, huge influence on me personally, and my playing. And I'm sure a lot of guys, Mississippi players, can relate to that.
Oh, I think so. I mean, I came up in Clarksdale, and I took up guitar late. I quote unquote late in life. I took up guitar when I was 18. So, a lot of my friends who are also musicians, they had been playing since they were 7, 8. I've got a sister that's been playing drums since she was 8, guitar since she was 10, and she's a monster. But I grew up. I grew up and blues was it. So I'm going to backtrack. I started actually as a church musician, but this is like mid to late 90s Baptist church musician. Acoustic guitar, no drums in the church. There's a piano, maybe an organ kind of thing. It wasn't what the worship world has become now, which is wild. I picked up my first church gig in forever while I was still living in Hattiesburg, playing down there, and just the production and the amount of everything going on was almost overwhelming. I'd been playing in musicals and like for show choirs and doing some other stuff like that. And I walked into this church gig and it was that level, like that put together. And, people playing to a click track, and there's backing tracks sometimes, and there's like this whole different world. And it was crazy to me. But, growing up, it was blues. Like my first guitar, my first electric guitar I bought in a pawn shop, and it used to belong to a blues musician named Super Chicken. I mean, these are the kind of people I grew up around. So I got to know Super Chicken, or I'd go see, I've played with a drummer whose name is Quicksand. These are the kind of people, this is the kind of music, this kind of, there's nothing inauthentic about it. Yes, I'm a white dude, sort of white dude, I'm Lebanese, but white dude playing the blues, but I got it from being around it authentically. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
And here in Mississippi, it's different. You grow up in it. And like some of the stuff I call blues, you go somewhere else, they're like, oh, that's soul music, or oh, that's rock and roll. I'm like, no, that's blues. I used to play guitar for a guy named Razorblade. That's the world. And so there's not a lot of people talking about that. And, also growing up in that musical world, people are playing an 80 Squire Strat into a PV Bandit, and they make it work.
Right.
So it's a wild world of Mississippi music, and that's one of the other things I'm going to start really exploring in this podcast, and we're going to talk about growing up in Mississippi, and we'll have plenty of time to do that. Today, though, we were going to talk about something that's been on my mind that I really want to kind of explore and talk out loud, is the concept, or just this whole age of gear that we're in and gear buying. Never has it been easier to buy guitar gear. It's insane. Reverb, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, Sweetwater's online. When I was growing up, if you needed something and you had to order it online, you went to Musician's Friend. That was what you had. You still had to call it in, technically. You got a catalog in the mail, you'd call it in, and you'd order it. Clarksdale had a music store, but it wasn't much of one at the time. They have a decent secondhand store now called Bluestown Music, and I love that store. But we had Myro's Music Shop, and they mostly did car speaker installations. That was their thing.
Okay.
So everything they had guitar related was PV, and not the good PV. It was never the good PV. But it was PV, and it was at list price. No MSRP, no wheeling and dealing. It's list price. That's what we had. So
yeah.
But now I can go online. I can compare prices against like 15 different merchants that'll all ship to me, or I can just go to Reverb, find the cheapest possible price. And I'm wondering, because I have sat today on my birthday and just hunted gear for no good reason. There's no gigs. I don't need anything. I have plenty of gear here at the house. I have too much gear here at the house. And every time I think I'm going to start downsizing the amount of gear I have, I've developed this emotional attachment to it, but still I'm hunting more. And I wonder, are we getting to a point where the gear is pushing out the music making?
We'll be right back.
This podcast is supported in part by Stringjoy Strings. I'm a snob, at least that's what people tell me. I'm never okay with good enough, and that's where Stringjoy Strings come in. They're better than good enough. They're the best. Stringjoy are making some of the finest strings available today right up the road from me in Nashville, Tennessee. They offer custom sets, balanced tension, coated strings, the works. If you need it, they can probably make it happen. You should be using Stringjoy Strings, and if you're going to order from them, you really could help this podcast out by clicking the affiliate link down in the description or show notes below. You get amazing strings, I get a little bit of that back to help the show keep going. It's a win-win situation. Get your Stringjoy Strings today.
Yeah, it could be. I've come to several points of my gear journey. I for the longest time, my rig was so simplistic. I think until I started, getting really into more prolific gear. I was using a multi-effects unit and a solid state amp and just a basic, made in Mexico Stratocaster, and I had that for the longest time. And kind of got crazy into gear where like, I started trading off stuff, and that was kind of a big deal for me as I would trade what I had, and I ended up like with a old twin reverb, and that was my first tube amp, and it was really crazy. It was like somebody had gone in and kind of just gutted the thing out and like used the existing PCB board in there, but like jumpered all over the place. And
oh wow,
it sounded great, but it didn't have reverb. If I remember, no, it didn't have the tremolo on it, and you couldn't plug into either channel. It was like you plugged into one and it cascaded into the next.
oh yeah,
And
that's a mod I've heard of.
Yeah, and so I took it to an amp tech at I can't remember the guy's name now. He had a Biloxi store, and Pinkston's. If you remember, I don't know if you've been down to when Pinkston's was in business.
No,
but I took it there, and the guy who's the amp tech, I knew his son. I went to college with him and played some music with him. And I sent it off to him, and I was like, I'm gonna get him to repair my amp, and he called me back when he got into it and was like, "Oh, this thing is just, butchered. It sounds good, but it's not reliable. I would not take this thing out to play with it. All this kind of," and it kind of spooked me, and I dumped it and got another amp, and I ended up getting a Bassman 10, and so which is a really sweet amp. At the same time, I ended up with a super reverb that I had traded a guitar for. It was a late 60s model, silver face, which I noticed you've got a couple of those.
Yeah, that's my thing. Actually, super reverb is why this podcast is called the 40-Watt Podcast. It's my ode to my love of the super reverb. I've had to have people talk me out of buying a third and fourth one just in the last couple of weeks.
Man, they're getting back when I was snatching those up, it was kind of like you could find a lot of them, but they needed like servicing.
Yeah.
And nobody knew how to do it. And I actually cut my teeth on getting in some online forums and talking to some people how to do, recap the thing and get it stable. And then weirdest thing, I kind of felt like I put all this DLC into it, and the guy who had sold it to me was like really regretted getting rid of it, and so I ended up like selling it back to him.
Oh, yeah.
And so I felt like it was going back to a good home. So anyways, I ended up doing that, and then I kind of got into like a box. I had a custom box amp built for me, and I kept coming back to that Fender. Like I really missed the Fender stuff. In the process, I picked up like another Bassman, like 100 head, and I was running that, in a 212. And it's all these big amps, right?
Oh yeah.
And I ended up, there was a guy local. It was crazy. He ran a barber shop in Picayune, and he ran like a little like nightclub thing out of the back of it. And he plays like golden oldies music, and he was dumping like a lot of gear. And he had this. Originally, I saw the listing, and it was like this homebrew amp, but it had like a Pro Reverb chassis in it. Okay. And so I went to go look at it. He wanted it was like ridiculously cheap. Like he said, he was going to sell like $150 or something.
Oh my gosh.
And when I was there, it had like this red fuzzy covering on it, like plush,
Yeah.
and like the grill cloth was like some weird color, and it was in a 1x15 cab that so it was like a split head and cab thing, and it was just really crazy looking. And when I'm there, he said, "Hey, do you want this? Got this other Fender amp?" And so I was like, "Well, I wasn't, about." He had this other Fender amp for $150, and it was a Super 6.
Oh man.
And it wasn't in the original cab though. It was in a 2x12.
Okay. So essentially,
And
it's a
so
twin reverb at that point.
it was a twin reverb. And so I snatched it up, and I got to playing them, and they both powered up and played. They needed some servicing, and I got to thinking. I said, you know what, this Pro belongs in this 2x12. Like that's what it's made to do.
Yep.
And so I put it in there, and I dumped the Super 6 because I kind of had been there, done that with the 85 watt amp.
Yeah, it's a
several
lot.
times.
That's a whole lot.
And so I had that Pro Reverb for quite a while. It was magical. But it was one of those things I never got around to servicing it. It was a little intermittent, and I ended up, I got super, and this is I'm coming to a point here. I got so fed up with having issues with my amps, and I decided I was just going to do this big gear purge. And I got rid of the box amp. I got rid of the I had like a Blues Junior laying around. I had a little Fender Champion 600 that I had somebody like gut out and put a Champ circuit in, a 5F2 in.
Oh yeah.
And I had all these amps, and like I was just super frustrated because I felt like I was spending all my time collecting gear, and so I just decided, I made the decision I was going to douse up, and I ended up trading off the Vox for there's a guy local. He had a Princeton he had just bought. It was one of the newer ones. It had this really cool like cowboy Tolex on it.
Oh yeah, I remember those. The brown with the paisley.
Yeah, and it had like some kind of Celestion. I think it's Celestion greenback in it. And so I traded that off, and ever since then, I'm kind of like, you know what? I'm getting the Fender tone I like, and it is in a small package. I can play this at home. I can gig with it. I got rid of everything else, and I couldn't be more happier because it was like a problem that was just hanging over my head. All of this stuff, and I didn't have a place to put it. So it was. I felt like it's one of those things where I love the big amps. I really do. There's some magic in them, and you can fill a room with them that I just, I've tried to go the modeling route and delve into that world, and I just never can be satisfied with it.
Yeah, no, I feel
but
that.
Like, this is like a good, happy medium for me, and I have to say, there's something in my mind about, the Super Reverb, or even that Pro that kind of set in that 40, 45 watt range, that there's something magical there that I can't quite explain.
It is.
And I think it's because of that. You get to a level of headroom where you can like sparkle and have some presence, but it also will break up. And so, I went from playing 85 watt amps down to 40. Now I'm down to like, 12 or 15. And I think they all have their place. But
oh yeah, different players. Every player's got their own thing they're looking for, and different venues they're playing that are going to fit it. It's interesting you went through that. You talked about the digital. This is where I really expose. It's sort of. I actually I'm almost embarrassed by the amount of gear I have. It's that point. You know what I mean? It's because I love the gear. I love all the different stuff, and I do have pre-COVID had a reason for most of it, like doing the church gigs and the musical gigs. I have a Helix rig for that. I have a full Helix floor, a couple of power cabs for when I need stage volume, but it has to be low. I find the power cabs work better than actual amps because they don't have to be turned up loud. You can get a little bit of stage volume, not blow anyone out, but then it's like I can't ditch the amp thing, like the actual tube amp, and so they keep appearing. I don't remember buying them half the time. I went through talking back when I was in college. So, luckily that used music store I was talking about opened up pretty early on in my music playing, and it was a buddy of mine. His dad opened it, so I was there all the time. So I'm seeing all this vintage gear come through used. Now it's the late 90s, early 2000s. I started going through gear, and I never had a lot at any given time, but I've been through a lot. Like my first tube amp was a 68 Bandmaster Reverb head into a 115 cabinet. That was my first tube amp.
Oh wow! Yeah.
Which I decided, I went to college. I'm like, I need a little combo. I can't go to college with this big amp. So I traded it back into that music store that I bought it in, and I got a Princeton Reverb 2, which is the Rivera design Fenders from the 80s.
Yeah.
Man, that thing. I've made some boneheaded gear moves. Getting rid of that Bandmaster Reverb was probably a big one, but getting rid of that Princeton Reverb 2, that was real dumb. I got really hung up on the fact that the drive channel on that amp wasn't great. But I think that was more I didn't understand it, because it's funny because Mesa Boogie was created to hot rod Fenders, and then Fender tried to mimic Mesa Boogie in that line of the 2 amps. That's what they were doing. Yeah. They were trying to capitalize on that market that Mesa Boogie had created out of Fender amps. So I think I just didn't understand that drive channel because I was still early in my playing. I didn't understand tone or the way amps work the way I do now, but had that amp, and then it became this revolving door of gear. I never had more than a couple of guitars at a time. I never had more than an amp at a time, but I just started flipping gear to the point that by the time, because I quit school for a while. That was early in college. I decided college wasn't for me. I had gone to MTSU to study recording industry management at one point, moved back to Clarksdale, and I just worked. I was the audio engineer and the assistant manager at Ground Zero Blues Club in Clarksdale.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I've got that's a whole experience for another podcast. Talk about some of the great experiences I got while working there and playing there, because I'll be honest, 60% of my gigging has been at Ground Zero Blues Club, either playing for other people or playing with my band. But when I went back to college, I ended up paying for my senior year of college just flipping gear, finding pawn shop deals, finding Craigslist deals, finding. I was very, very active on the Seymour Duncan user group forum, and they had a very active trading forum. So I'd flip gear and make money, and I got really used to it. So I've been through a lot of gear. Well, at some point, I started getting sentimental about gear. It's not just a tool anymore. I have this thing, and I have to have this thing, and so I buy it, and then I hold on to it. The Helix I bought to flip because I got it at a ridiculous deal. I was up at 2 in the morning on Reverb, and one of the new listings was a Helix floor at like a stupid price, and so I bought it. I was like, I'm gonna make $400 on this, and then now I've still got it. It's just one of those things. I still have it. It's and so it's been in my brain today because I've got, I'm sitting at, it's embarrassing. What I have like 5 decent sized tube amps, plus I have a Roland JC120 right now. The Roland I don't count because I actually have to play keyboard through it, believe it or not. But like I've got a couple of Victorias, which are great. I love. Other people make that tweed amp, and I got them through trade deals. They're nothing I bought outright. You find something. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I haven't tried that piece of gear. I'll trade you. Let me try this out. And so I've got them. Turns out tweed isn't my thing. Blackface Fender sound is my thing. It just is. I'm coming to grips with it. I can't be that guy who has a little of everything and plays it well. No. I play blackface Fenders. That's my sound. But of course, I toss it out there for sale. But what am I listening to the most? The trade offers. I'm like, what are you going to trade me? Like what else is out there that I haven't tried? And it's a problem. And so I see the gear community, and I don't want to rail against anybody who has a ton of gear and loves it. That's awesome if you're in a place that you can afford it. You're not taking food out of mouths and you have the space for it. But I do wonder, at what point does it become detrimental, and how many people are substituting the buying gear for the playing of music and creating music. And I don't want to demonize one or the other, because it's
Right.
completely viable. If that's your jam, go for it. But I think for me, like the gear hoarding and buying and trading and selling and the whole circus around it is actually hindering my music making.
Yeah, it definitely, I can relate to that. You know, and I think sometimes it's good to purge and just, you know, I got to a point where I was always trading, but then got to a point it's like, no, if this was meant to be a flip, then I'm gonna cash out on this, and use it for what I intended to. If it's I've done it where I bought this piece of gear to flip, but it was to go towards the vacation fund or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
And it's hard when you get into something, you pick up a piece of gear and you get attached to it to do that. But to me, amplifiers are a little less like where I can get attached to them. When it comes to guitars, I don't do a lot of buying and selling of guitars. I keep it, and if it's one I'm mean to keep, it stays in my stable for a long time, unless I'm buying something as a flip. The pedals are that way for me too, because I think pedals are something, for me, coming from the multi-effects unit background and everything, like I knew what effects I needed, because you would build your chain. But like, I never owned like all these pedals, like some guys I know, like, they cut their teeth on playing, big muffs or fuzz faces,
Right.
or DS1s and all that stuff. To me, that was like a whole new world, because I never actually had the physical, pedal. And so I kind of went through a process where like I had to pedal. I want this one. Oh, this one's a good deal on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. I'm going to go get it. And it's a good bit of trial and error, because you start to find out what you like and what you don't like. And then I think you hit something very important is sometimes you just don't know how to use something.
Yeah.
You get it and you don't understand it, and you get confused by it, and you say, well, this doesn't work for me. And then you realize later, sometimes you get reintroduced to it later and realize, oh, I just wasn't using this right. Or, it's like, here's a classic example. I know somebody has like one of those core delay pedals, and they love it. And it's like kind of preampy.
Oh, yeah.
And they were talking about how, oh, I just can't find a drive section I like. Like, everything's so crunchy and saturated. And what they realized was they were running that preamp so hot in that thing that it was fuzzing out everything in their chain.
Yeah. So the delay was what was causing all the fuzz, not the distortion pedals they were using or drive pedals.
Exactly. And it's like, no, that Timmy that you had or whatever was not the problem, or whatever pedal,
Whatever lowest drive that you could find was still too much. That wasn't the issue.
Yeah, that was not it. And so it's a lot of trial and error, finding out what you like and don't like, and it inspires you. But I advocate, Aaron Abubo kind of coined this term with the Gear Slum podcast, and it kind of made me start to ponder my gear acquisition syndrome. And it's like, it's doing a pedal purge is a good thing every now and then. Just purge them. Start over. If you realize, hey, I need this tube screamer back in my life, then go get it later. So like,
yeah, there's no shortage of tube screamers.
Live without with. Yeah, like find out what you can live out without, and start building. And so, for me, I'm probably at the lowest amount of gear that I've had in years because one, I realized, well, I'm predominantly an acoustic guitar player, in my context.
Right.
And so it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to, have this even like a P-dub board because the likelihood is I'm always having somebody play guitar for me rather than getting to play those parts. And so it's really my electric guitar playing is my hobby. And so
that makes sense.
Do I need all of this stuff? And that's a hard answer, but you have to answer that for yourself. But for me personally, it was no. I think I'd rather, invest this or get all this gear out way so I can pick up an instrument and learn this new technique or this new style. One of the things I did in the pandemic, I had a bunch of guitars laying around that kind of like there's one. It was like my first kind of intermediate acoustic, and I don't enjoy playing it. It's a ceramic guitar, it's laminate, it's got super high action, and I decided I was gonna do something with this, and I turned it into a little lap steel.
Oh yeah, nice.
And so like that's an avenue of playing that I've never explored, and so just trying to find something new and how to approach playing guitar differently and playing in those open tunings and, developing my ear for picking out melodies where my fingers aren't on the fret, I'm having to strictly go off my ear. Yeah, it's a little mind bending, but I think as musicians, like we need to know what we're good at and what we need. Like you said, the blackface, that's the basics of your sound. You need to know those things and begin to learn about, but you also, I know this is a bit of a paradox, but you also got to know, you got to explore, and sometimes it's a gadget or a piece of gear or something that pushes you in a different direction to play your instrument differently. And so, I just think it's good to always be kind of kicking up the dust a little bit,
Oh, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
You were talking about pedal purge and guitars are the thing. Actually, believe it or not, guitars are the hardest thing for me to part with. Once I find a guitar I like, now if I buy a guitar or I get a guitar on a deal and I'm like, I know within a week if this is a keeper for me. But once it becomes keeper, it's keeper. You're gonna have to pry this out of my hands. It's because I don't sell guitars for the most part. Amps are getting tougher because a lot of people are going so digital, and especially right now there are no gigs. I did this really dumb thing during the pandemic, but I couldn't help it. I also play bass. I've played bass for years. I've played in a bunch of bands. Actually played in college. I got a music degree from Delta State University. And, sure, there was guitar in a couple of ensembles, but I still needed more ensembles. And so I played bass in the steel band or, whatever else was going on.
Right.
But I had this little, again, crazy Facebook deal. I have this really great jazz bass that I was looking for a little Fender Rumble combo a few years ago, right? I'm like, I just need like a Rumble 40 because I didn't have a bass amp at the time. And I was like, there are some more gigs I could be getting if I had a bass amp. I had a bass. I just didn't have an amp anymore because I'd sold it when we moved because I wasn't using it. And, you want to move less stuff when you move. It's just the way it is. I was like, well, I just need a little combo. And I found a guy on Facebook that was selling a Rumble 200, which is bigger than I was looking for. But he was selling a Rumble 200 and a 1997 American Deluxe jazz bass for $700.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh my gosh. So I messaged him. I asked if he was interested in any trades. He said, no, I really sort of need the money. I'm just looking for cash. He didn't say he needed the money. He said, I'm just looking to sell. No big deal. I said, okay, great. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to be able to get this deal. That's going to go real fast. Right? So, fast forward a week. I look, and it's still on Facebook. So I messaged him again. I said, hey, dude, you still got this? He said, Yeah, he said, I've gotten some people try to lowball me, but nobody's really serious about buying it. I was like, give me a couple of hours. So I like hunted. I was like, what can I get rid of? Like sell fast. And, like most Mississippians, I owned a hunting rifle.
Mm-hmm.
So I called up, and I don't hunt. I had a hunting rifle. I don't hunt. So I was like, I bet I could sell this. So I talked to some friends of mine, found somebody looking for a hunting rifle like that, sold my rifle, bought that base and amp, drove to Terry, Mississippi to buy it. Get there, and I'm playing it, checking it out. He's like, now I've been playing it all these years, so it's a little worn out. Dude, there's not a mark on it. It's pristine. And this is the Sir era of Fender basses. So this is when Sir was designing all of the stuff that was coming out of the American Deluxe line. And so I'm like, okay, I start to load up. He's like, oh, well, this goes with it. He hands me the stand that the amp was on. I was like, okay, that's cool. Oh, and here. And he hands me like an eight space rack case with a power conditioner, a tuner, and a compressor in it.
Oh my gosh.
I was like, okay. So yeah, you get those deals. They still happen. Anyway, neither here nor there. I eventually, I played that amp for a while. It was great. So I was like, oh, I really want a tube bass amp. And I'm not playing big venues. So I started looking for like one of those, the Ampeg V4Bs, I think, or the ones I'm talking about. Little 100-watt deals or 200, or not even 200 watts. They're like 100-watt deals or even one of the 50-watt. I'm like, I just need something for stage volume, and it's going to go direct anyway. Well, no gigs. Everybody's selling everything cheap. I found an Ampeg SVT Classic and 8x10 for $900.
Oh, that's smoking, yeah.
Yeah, and so I sold my Rumble 200, I sold something else, and I went and snagged it. So now sitting in my storage, it's not even in my house, because, it's a massive amp. I'm like, when am I going to even use this? So, but it's like, I had to have it because it was going so cheap. All that to say, I strayed away from my point. Amps aren't selling very well right now. Not big amps anyway. If it's bigger than a Princeton, you're going to have a hard time moving it. Everyone's going digital. That's fine. I like my big amps. I like my Super Reverb. I actually just ordered this week. You were talking about pedal purge. I finally did the pedal purge.
Good.
For the most part, I'm down. I can get in an eye shot every pedal I own. I went from a big pedal train classic pro with. I had the RV5, like all the 500 series bosses, the RV, the reverb delay, and the modulation. Had like 4 drive pedals, an expression pedal, a volume pedal, compression. It was nuts. It was massive. And I was like, every gig that I would ever need this many options, I have the Helix for.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay, let's get rid of this then. I was like, okay, sell off the Boss pedals. That's an HX Stomp right there. Okay. So I did that. I bought an HX Stomp. I already had a Strymon Volante for tape delay. I kept it. And a guy offered me a trade for a Paul Cochran Timmy. And so that's my whole pedal board right now, is a Cochran Timmy into the HX Stomp with the Strymon Volante in the loop of the Stomp. It's beautiful. I can carry it like strapped on my back, and it's nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
So I sold everything else off.
Yeah, it's an age where I think like Garrett's come full circle, because like when in the 90s and the 2000s, like digital, it was very popular then, especially like in the people starting out, like pick up a Line 6 Spider or a little Digitech 4 unit, because it was so accessible. But like those units, didn't have the ability to process all of those effects.
Yeah.
And so like we've come to like where chip technology now is so good and you can run. I mean, even the HX was at like 6 to 8 different things at one time.
Yeah, it's up to 8 now with the 3.0.
Yeah, and so they're amazing. I borrowed one from a friend for like 6 months. It was amazing all that I could do on there, and I'd spend a lot of times headphones on or playing direct to sound system, just mess around with it. It was wonderful. I don't know if I'll totally ever get away from amps, but the effects in those things are so good. I think the only thing I don't like about is just menu diving. But even then, there's such a trade-off.
And coming from the Boss 500 units, which I love, by the way, I think they sound amazing. The menu diving in them is so tedious and so painstaking that the Helix menu diving, I could set this thing up. I don't have a whole lot programmed on it because I know that I can walk into a gig and somebody call a tune and I'm like, oh, well, I really need a phaser for this tune. I can have a phaser in there in less than 10 seconds. It's just that easy.
Yeah, it's amazing where this technology has gone, and I think it's more the needs of musicians today has changed from when we were starting to gig and everything, because back then I know that front of house wasn't something that was a given when you went somewhere,
right?
And so what was typical was you were singing into a microphone that might be running through like a little powered head into some speakers or something, and then everybody else in the band was responsible for their amplification.
Absolutely.
And that's just not the situation we're in anymore.
No.
Like everything is, matter of fact, you can kind of, unless, I think Mississippi is one of the last places where there still is quite a lot of players and places to play that don't like police people in the way they play.
Oh,
but
yeah. You mean like volume?
Yeah, like volume wise. But like I think in the next 10 years, even that's going to be gone. Like it's going to be nothing to walk in and they're going to want somewhat of a silent stage or you to have your volume way down. And so the needs of players are changing, and it's just sign of the times. It's funny you mentioned like the church. The churches are actually a lot more demanding when it comes to gear, than playing in some club. Churches have very strict. I think, and it's because like they made that switch, 10, 20 years ago from the organ and piano thing, and the acoustics in the room can't handle those kind of volumes. And people aren't used to it.
That makes a lot of sense. I'd not actually.
So you're having to make it very
perspective
palpable to people that aren't used to listening to this kind of music.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense, and not an avenue I thought about it in the churches and why they made that switch to the nearly silent stages. And I think that's another thing we've got that probably a little late today to talk about it, but at some point I want to really talk about how the church music industry is driving the gear industry much more so than any other aspect, at least in the U.S. I don't know how well the church music industry translates once you leave our borders, but in the U.S., like that's where you're seeing a lot of these big rigs. That's where you're seeing a lot of the crazy switching and the MIDI. I have a buddy of mine who was he's actually started his own company now, and I won't plug him now. I'll hit him up for a sponsorship later. But we'll see if I can get him to be our first sponsor. But he was playing and doing media for a big church over in Birmingham, and this is before I'd set up the big rig, and he did the trifecta, the Mobius, the Timeline, and the Big Sky. And he had them all synced to MIDI, and it was the first time anyone ever talked to me about the fact that all of the guitar player's effects were synced through MIDI with the keyboard player into Ableton, so that he never had to do anything. Like, what?
It was just switching his patches as the click track was rolling into the next song.
Exactly. Yeah. It was the most. And not long after that, I played a show for the Hattiesburg Civic Light Orchestra. I can't remember what they're called. The local theater troupe and orchestra down in Hattiesburg. We did Mamma Mia, and it was. Let me see if I can remember correctly. It was two. There were two guitar players, me and another guitar player. There were 4 keyboards, an electric drum kit, a bassist, and an electric percussionist playing like electric mallet stuff. It was crazy. I'd never seen the instrument before in my life. But they were all connected through main stage. And literally all they did was read music. They never changed the sounds on their keyboard. They just played. And as they're playing, the sound changed to whatever was appropriate for the tune that they were on at the time.
Yeah.
And it was the production level was not what I was used to playing in blues bars in Mississippi. You know what I mean? Where I cut my teeth. Like you're talking about, players are responsible for their amplification. Even at Ground Zero, the majority of the sound is stage sound, and that's a big-ish venue for Mississippi and for blues. You know, I'd play F. Jones Corner in Jackson, and the only thing going through the PA is vocals. In fact, they don't let you put the kick drum through the PA because people have blown out the speakers doing that.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like I actually would carry my own little 15 and a small powered head to be able to put kick drum into in that venue. Because I had to have it and needed a little thump when you're playing blues. But it's a different world. And I think that's really driving some of the gear buying and some of the gear producing. Some of the gear being made is made for that. But then I look at like all the pro guys, and you talked about the digital world back in the 90s, you know, and the early 2000s. I was listening this morning. I went on a run and I listened to the newest Chasing Tone podcast with Brian Wampler.
Yeah.
And he interviewed Henning Pauly, who obviously does tons of YouTube stuff. But they specifically talked about Henning's time as a like young hotshot producer when he's producing all this like prog rock stuff, right?
Right.
And I wish I had the memory to say the artists that he named, but they're artists you'd know, right? They're guitarists and bands you would know that he produced in that time period. And when he's talking to Brian, he said, I didn't know a thing about really guitar pedals at that time. He said, all of those albums were with a Pod Bean, the Pod 2. He's like, that's all of those amp sounds on those albums are a Pod, like that late 90s Pod. I was like, that's crazy. Because I had one of those. They didn't sound that great, or I couldn't make it sound very good. So we've come a long way, but even then, they sounded good enough to make albums with. So there's something we wanted to talk about, but we're getting pretty late, so I want to start wrapping it up because I don't want to hold you all night. But there's this other side. There's the dopamine response of buying things, retail therapy, you know?
Right.
And I think some of that is at play because I know that I get that high when I buy a piece of gear or when I make that trade, make that deal. I was talking to a buddy of mine, Kyle, while I was wheeling and dealing with some amps and making some trades and doing some stuff like that. Or I was selling, I love this one. I was selling on Reverb. I had one of the JHS Klon pedals, right?
Okay.
And it was one of the bronze or brass looking ones. I got it in a trade deal a few years ago. I loved it. It sounded great. I used it on my board forever. I thought I would just hold on to it. Well, recently JHS did a shootout video with an OG Klon. In fact, Klon serial number 2, apparently. He has the first Klon that was sold commercially. That shouldn't surprise anybody who's been watching the JHS channel.
Right.
And he shot it out against one of his clones. And they sound identical. They sounded completely and utterly identical. So at that point, I was like, well, I never have to worry about getting a Klon because I've got one that sounds just like an OG. So I was fine with that until I saw what happened to the reverb prices. I was like, oh, okay. I'm not balling so hard that I can hold on to this pedal if it's worth this much. I'm not going to do it. So I listed it on Reverb. I put a crazy price tag on it. I listed that pedal at $1,000. Mm-hmm. And so for anybody who listens to this in the future, this is December of 2020. So whenever you hear this, whatever the prices might be, check. But I listed at $1,000 because there was no other. There were a couple of silver ones on there. There was none in the bronze case. And a guy offered me $700, and I started talking to my buddy at this point. I'm like, this is where the fun is for me. And I realized how much of a high I got off of the negotiating, the countering offers, the back and forth, trying to find how much is this guy willing to spend. Ultimately, he bought it for more than any other JHS Klon had gone for on Reverb at the time. It's nuts. But I got that high, again, off of the bartering and the sale of it.
Yeah.
Not off anything musical. And so I wonder how much of that is creating the culture of just stuff in the music industry. Is just that dopamine response of something new.
Yeah. Well, there's quite a bit of that in the gear world, I've noticed. It's almost a little bit like that movie Adam Sandler was in about the diamonds. I can't remember the title of it.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm the worst guy to ask movie titles about.
But like it's like the guy was a jeweler, but like he would literally get highs, off finding something that he knew he could make a ton of money on and gamble with. And there's a little bit of that, I think, that resonates with people in the gear industry. It's like, it's like, okay, you start thinking in your mind, I have this, and this, and this is what's in my deck of cards, and what can I come up with to, get my dream or my ideal, and there's a lot of that in the gear industry, but when it comes down to it, that has nothing to do with how we create or play music. It's kind of like that just sideshow that's going on with us as musicians, right? And I don't know. It's one of those things for me. I keep coming in for a full circle. I'll be like a little season where I'm doing this, but then I realize I need to get back into my playing a little bit more, and I don't think it's going away. All these choices, and to me, I have like option paralysis.
Yeah.
When I start researching gear, I think about all these options, and it takes me a long time, and then sometimes when I pull the trigger and actually, follow through and get something, it's like some weird reason why, like it's maybe like an emotional response to it, or, I realize, well, I can have this in my hands right now and play this, if I jump on this deal and get this right now instead of, anyways. So there's a little bit of that going on too in the gear industry. I think, guitar and gear has never been so accessible,
Oh, absolutely.
It just hasn't. It's never been this accessible. And I heard, like you said on, I think your episode 1 or 2, you were talking about your musicians' accessibility to each other. The fact is, if you get involved in today's gear culture, there's a likelihood that if you're in one of these big monster groups like 60 Cycle Home or Tone Mob or Wampler or whatever,
Metal Boards of Doom,
yeah, there's going to be your hero players are probably in there working around,
Yeah, exactly.
There's just that likelihood, and there's not a lot of difference in our accessibility to the people who we admire and hold up on a pedestal as musicians. The fact is, you start to learn that they're not much different,
No,
and so
they go through it just like we do.
yeah, they go through all this stuff too, and so it's an interesting time. It's absolutely nothing like growing up going to a mom and pop where all you're exposed to is the house brands. And, being in Mississippi, Peavy was king.
Yep.
There's just nothing that world does not exist anymore.
Yeah, I'll tell you someday I'll tell you a fun story about the night I sat down with Hartley Peavy and got drunk. That was a good time.
Yeah, he's still kicking around. I went by their booth, and he was still there at NAMM, like, working the floor.
That's
I was
fantastic.
like, wow, that's crazy. I was floored that he doesn't have to be going to NAMM at his age, and how he's kind of handed off the company. There's no reason he has to be there, but he goes there. I'm sure because of the connections of the people, and he's having a fun time. So.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and so on that accessibility, I'll tell a fun story so recently I started supporting the Brothers Landreth through Patreon, right? Big fan of Joey Landreth. I absolutely love his songwriting and his guitar playing. And so I was like, you know what? I love these guys. I want them to be able to keep doing what they're doing. So I'll support them on Patreon. Next thing I know, I get an invite to a Discord. And so there's this Discord server for Brothers Landreth fans and their Patreon supporters. And Joey and David are just constantly in there chatting, talking, just hanging out with folks. I had an issue with my UA interface yesterday, and Joey Landreth walked me through fixing it. Like, that's how close we are to artists now, right? Now, Joey Landreth isn't, he's not a multi-platinum artist or anything, but he's still not a nobody.
Right.
So it's crazy, that kind of world that we're in, and it's a world that I'm still new to, and it's why I'm still learning what I'm doing. I'll end with this story, and you'll completely understand. So I played blues in Mississippi. I had a Super Reverb. I've had a Super Reverb for 15 years now. It's a 1970. It's been black-faced. That's my Till Death Do We Part amp. That's the only amp I own that I'd be willing to save from a burning building, right? I love that amp. I have the 69 that I bought this year. I like the 70 more. The 70 just sounds better. The 69 is great. But I had that amp. I had a small pedal board, and it grew over the years, but not by much. And I had a wah pedal, a tube screamer. Actually, at one point, I was using a full-tone full drive, too, because I like the tube screamer sound, but I wanted the boost. A Univibe, and a tremolo. That was my entire pedal board. That was it. And that was basically my pedal board. And even though I played a Super, I like to have a pedal tremolo because the Super doesn't get slow enough for me. I can't get it to pulse slow enough. So I always have to have a pedal for tremolo. I know you're a tremolo fan as well. I think you have your one that was made for your podcast.
Yeah, I love tremolo.
Yeah, me too. And it turns out I'm a bias trim fan. I've tried harmonic, I've tried optical. I like bias trim. That's my jam. Neither here nor there. That was it. 4 pedals. So that was my pedal board for 10 years. Minor tweaks here and there. I'd go to a regular tube screamer and not the full drive, and then I'd end up back at the full drive. Tried a couple of different Univibes, but that was basically it. I used the Voodoo Lab 4-knob trim for 10 years. Until I was selling a guitar, and a guy offered me some pedals in trade for it. And that was when I got the JHS Klon. I got an Eventide H9, and there was something else. It was a Keeley 4-knob compressor, right? I was like, I was looking to sell, but sure, why not? I was kind of intrigued. I hadn't tried new pedals in forever. This was about 2016, maybe 2017. And then I tried that H9. And then I was like, oh, well, I don't really know much about this H9. And let me look it up. And then all of a sudden I discovered Guitar Gear YouTube and like all of these new effects. Like I had missed the pedal boom. I had missed it because I'd been playing the same pedal board for 10 years and been completely content making music with this small pedal board for 10 years. And suddenly, no, I need this, I got to have this, I need to try this, and then it just blew up. And now it consumes my world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's an interesting conundrum that we'll talk about on another time because it's getting late. I'm going to let you go. Clifton, I really appreciate you coming on, talking with me. Hopefully I'll get you back. I keep saying we like there's somebody else here. I do it a lot. I'm sure if you've listened to the episodes, I say we a lot. It's me. That's it. But whatever. It's the royal we, I guess. But tell folks where they can find you out there on the interwebs.
You can find me at Clifton Worley Show. Facebook, there's a group. I'm on Instagram as well. And, you can find me on any podcast catcher. You can hit me up on my personal Facebook as well. And I've been shifting to where I've just been sharing a lot of stuff just on my personal one. And it's funny, the algorithms actually goes a little further there than it does sometimes in those groups these days.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, you can find me there. And, man, I really love what you're doing. Thanks for having me on. And it's been a blast, man.
Sure. And again, I'm glad to have Mississippi folks on here. Hopefully I can trick you into coming on more often because it's a lot more fun when I'm talking to someone and it's not just me talking out into the void staring at my wall while I'm recording these things.
Absolutely. Anytime, man.
I appreciate it. All right, y'all. As for me, I'm Phillip. You can email the podcast at 40watt podcast. That is 40watt podcast at gmail.com. You can also call and leave a voicemail at 662-546-0615. You can find us on all social, or find me on social media. Capo First Fret tends to be my personal social media on everything. So if you see Capo First Fret, it's probably me. There's also a Instagram for the podcast that I'm hoping to get really kicked off here soon. I just haven't had time to devote to it. Hopefully you'll come back next time. We'll have a new episode up on Friday where I'm going to talk about some more things around the creative nature of music. It's going to be a good time. It'll be probably shorter than this one if I'm talking to the walls again. So appreciate y'all. Y'all have a great week. This episode is brought to you by the supporters of 40 Watt Podcast over on Patreon. Go over to patreon.com/40 Watt where for as little as $3 per month, you can help support the podcast and get every episode ad-free. For $5 a month, you'll get every episode ad-free as well as a bonus episode every week. I can't overstate how thankful I am for the support of my patrons and hope you'll consider joining the team and helping keep this show on the road.